Hello, today on my channel you will hear an amazing story about life. I hope you enjoy this story. This one struck me to the core. Honestly, I still can't forget it. Enjoy watching.
Two men were leisurely sipping a dark, expensive drink from puff glasses and watching half-naked girls of model appearance frolic in the pool. Their silence was broken by an elderly woman who came out of the house. She was wearing an old-fashioned but neat dress with a lace collar and a snow-white apron with ruffles that should have been in some local history museum long ago. Not on her apron. "John, why are you drinking like that?" "No appetizer." The woman looked sternly at one of the men. "You're going to fall asleep like that." "What are you doing?" John grinned peacefully. "The meat is frying over there. Now we'll have an appetizer." "When will it be roasted?" The old woman continued to grumble, carefully clearing a place on the table for the huge dish she had brought with her. "Here, I've made some slices for you. Eat up," she shouted again. "Otherwise, those of you over there," she nodded toward the pool, "will just hang out here." "Selena," the other man exclaimed reproachfully. "What are you like? The girls came here just to relax, swim, eat kimbap." "Aha, you Max, don't take me for completely out of my mind. I know your rest. Then you have to boil the bedding and shovel out the used poo. You're grown men, and you still can't play. Selena, don't start that old song," John begged. I'm not. That old woman chin up. "But I'll die soon. Who will follow you? Higher, you say? So a stranger won't take care of you the way you need, with a soul." "I'll die." John wagged his finger. "Not yet. And anyway, you should worry less about me and rest more. I would hire you an assistant. You would not have to bother yourself from morning to night cleaning and cooking, no command." "No way. I don't need an outsider here. Enough of your lazy asses with walkie-talkies." Selena waved her hand and went into the house. "She's strict." Max grinned. "That's just the way it is," said John, "but that's good. You immediately feel that someone needs you not for money or connections. And you can't let a stranger do that. And sometimes you need a good pastoress asteriskly. So what does she want then, if she doesn't need a stranger in the house and she's going to die? She wants to marry me. She wants someone to look after me. So what's the matter? Get married." Max looked at his friend in surprise. There are so many to choose from. "Max, don't I have any self-respect?" John took a sip from his glass and took a bite of crunchy cucumber from the plate Selena had brought. "What do I need this for?" The man nodded toward the pool. "To have money pumped out of me, to have tantrums, and to be told every day that I owe money. I want to come home and see a quiet, obedient wife who is waiting for me with a hot dinner and a warm bed." "Ah ha ha." Max laughed so loudly that the pool became quiet. "So you should go to the Middle Ages. You can't find such a place nowadays. Even in the most remote village, girls know what they want and will not miss their own. But they haven't invented a time machine yet. Where are you going to find one? Or is that an excuse? From Selena?" "You won't believe it." John thoughtfully turned his glass in his hand. "There is one. I've seen it." "Come on. Where'd you find this miracle?" "Nowhere. It came on its own. Right to the gate." "Oh, come on. Where are you hiding it?" Max turned his head, as if trying to find something he'd never seen before. "Nowhere. She didn't come to see me. She came to see her boyfriend. She was picking him up from work. Turns out you worked for me. So it's a bummer. Or does she have a sister? I mean, a woman like you wouldn't fall for money. She doesn't. So you want to buy her boyfriend?" "I'm still thinking about it." "Oh, nice girls." Tony was eagerly looking at the bathing girls. "I wish the owner would be generous enough to let us have some fun today." "Is there such a thing?" Jack had just worked at Walker's place and didn't know everything about the owner's life. "Yeah, a couple times. We had a lot of fun." "What about work?" "We take turns. One man on duty, the other one having fun." "But don't you have a girlfriend?" Yes, I do. And we're getting married." "Then you're not interested." "Why not? Before we get married, we can try it out. Especially since I can't make any money on my own. And this is free." "You're a bug." Tony laughed. "Aren't you afraid that your fiancée will leave you for such thoughts?" "Julia? No. She's madly in love with me. Ever since high school, I was seeing someone else, and she was waiting for me, and then I joined the army. So I thought, what's not a wife? She's beautiful, economical. Her father promised to build us a house. So, when was the wedding? We decided early fall, so that we don't have to spend so much money. I see. Will you invite me? Of course I will. Stop talking. The head of security came to the young men. It's time to go around the perimeter. Tommy and Jack marched bravely to the perimeter. A huge black car came out of the gate and stopped next to Julia. The glass on the driver's side slowly rolled down, revealing to the girl's gaze the driver, a man of about 35. His face was impenetrable. Only his brown eyes scrutinized the girl intently and tenaciously. Scared, Julia recoiled from the road to the bushes growing on the side of the road. The glass slowly crept upward, hiding the man's stony face. A moment later, the car sped off, speeding out of sight. Only now did Julia realize that all the time the man had been staring at her, she had been afraid to breathe. The wrought iron gate creaked open and Jack, Julia's fiancé, stepped out. He was not happy about something. When he saw the girl, he went toward her. "What are you doing here?" "I'm meeting you." "Am I a little kid?" "I was just thinking." "I just thought she thought." Jack, without stopping, walked past the bride. "What's wrong, Tima?" The girl got worried. "Is there a problem at work?" "There's no trouble at all, except that they don't think of us as human beings." "What do you mean?" "That's how. It turns out that our working hours are irregular. As the boss decides, you'll work the same way. If he wants to keep you awake 24 hours a day, if he wants to throw you out like a puppy with no severance pay. How can you do that? How are people supposed to live? What about their families? They don't. Nobody cares about an employee's personal life. Either work or quit. So your boss must have a turnover. Would you believe it? No. Half of them live here who don't have families, and those with families live here too. Their wives work here. That's how they put up with it. When we get married, will we live here too? We'll see. Jack's gotten better and finally looked at his fiancée with affection. What about you? Did your father take out a loan? No one's giving him a loan. He owes everyone, neighbors and banks. Julia's father was a farmer. Everything was going well until last year, but last summer was so rainy that all the crops flooded, giving the plants no chance. What grew in the greenhouses was barely enough to cover some of the losses. Livestock began to decline from the constant moisture and lack of feed. Julia's family was in desperate straits. Barely surviving the winter, Nani, Julia's father, borrowed a huge sum from banks and wealthier neighbors in the hope of raising the farm. But once again he failed. One night, from faulty wiring, the barn and the barn adjacent to it burned down. The newly purchased animals were badly damaged, and there was no talk of putting them into production and compensating for the damage in any way. Not to mention the barn where seeds for upcoming plantings and animal feed were stored. Nanny fell into despair. The enormous debt and the impossibility of starting over had taken its toll on him. Everything of any value was sold off, but that didn't even cover a tenth of the debt. Jack, as a future son-in-law, had nobly promised to help pay Nani's debts, for which he was very grateful. When he received his first paycheck, he proudly took it all to his future father-in-law. However, when he took the next shift, his pride was diminished. His workmates were bragging to each other about who and how they spent their earnings. Some had gone to an expensive club, some had bought a fancy gadget, and some had made a large loan payment on a new car. John Walker paid his employees well, much less his security guards. None of this was something Jack could brag about. All he got from his paycheck was Nani's ingratiating smile and Julia's devoted looks. She wouldn't even let him kiss her when he, proud of what he'd done, took her to the village club for a disco. Raised in strictness, the girl did not want to think about any kind of lovemaking before marriage. Upset by his foolishness, Jack decided that he would not throw his money away like that again. He also wanted to visit a real club, a new phone and an expensive car. After thinking it over, he suggested the following to Nanny. "Uncle Archie, how about you take out a loan to cover all your debts at once and I'll pay it off? Otherwise you're like this. You pay off one loan and the second one grows in the meantime." His calculation was simple. They will not give Nani more credit, and he, Jack, referring to the fact that he is about to have a wedding with his daughter, will stop giving money. His expectations were justified to the future father-in-law. No one lent money. Smiling at his cunning, Jack embraced Julia and tried to kiss her, but she dodged again. "What's the matter, Julia? The young man said it indignantly. Why don't you feel like you belong with me? We'll be married soon and I'll kiss you anyway. When we get married, then you will. The girl replied softly, smiling. Why should I put up with it? Your father didn't wait until we were married to take money from me. Why do you say that, Jack? Julia's eyes filled with tears. You know we're in a desperate situation, and every day of delay makes it worse. Maybe I'm in a hopeless situation too. Jack roared and grabbed his fiancée, hugged her with force and pressed his lips painfully against hers. The girl cried and began to break free, but the forces were unequal. Hey! In the struggle, they did not hear a huge jeep stop nearby. From the windows of the jeep looked at them laughing men of large build, and only the driver, the same one who a few minutes ago was looking at Julia, glumly transferred his gaze from boy to girl. No more lovemaking. Get in the car. We have a job to do. But it's my shift. Jack stopped talking when he met the driver's gaze. Okay. Without looking at Julia, he got into the car. Through tear-stained eyes, Julia saw the driver give her another serious look. For a moment, she thought the man was making up his mind. The car sped off, leaving the girl to calm down on the side of the road. What's the problem? The Jeep's passengers were having a good time. Screw her. Jack was embarrassed in front of the guys. We're getting married in a couple months, and she's still playing the princess. So you give her some money, and she'll come around. The co-workers kept laughing. Women are like that when they see many become kind and loving. I've given her almost my entire paycheck. Jack clapped himself on the leg. Not to her, to her father. Ha ha ha. The car was literally shaking with laughter. Well, you should go to your father's house. He's got a lot of debts. They'll probably put him on the meter soon. I, as a decent man, decided to help, and this one. Ha ha ha. She didn't appreciate it. Another burst of laughter. Stop laughing. The driver's calm voice blew away the smiles of those laughing with an icy wind. Let's get to work. Silence reigned in the cabin, broken by the hum of the engine. Jack stepped out of the cottage gate. To his disappointment, Julia did not meet him. Offended, thought Jack contemptuously. Never mind, a couple of daisies and a promise of help will bring her favor back. The young man headed in the direction of his home. He needed a good night's sleep. It had been a rough night. It was like John was stuck in the 90s. He's all about the gunfights and the fights. Although maybe that's why he has what he has. A huge fortune, a well-established firm, foreign contracts. Jack slept most of the day. When he woke up, he went to Julia's. He had to reconcile. After all, she was his future wife. And though she wasn't the enviable bride she'd been before her father's farm went bankrupt, she was still a good match for the other girls in the marriage. Well-mannered, modest, beautiful, and importantly, untouched. That was what Jack liked best of all. At Julia's house, he was greeted with joy only by her father. Julia, with a nod, went into the kitchen to put the kettle on. Nanny rushed out with a broad smile to meet his future son-in-law. Jack, hello. Come in, come in. Julia's going to pour us some tea. How about something stronger, Jack? Nanny winked at him. Jack grimaced. He really didn't like being called Tamaka, and after the wedding he planned to correct it. No thanks. I have another ship tomorrow. Good for you. Good for you. Julia. Nanny shouted towards the kitchen. Where are you? If you're such a sloppy wife, Jack will leave you. Julia appeared in the living room, carrying a tray with cups and vases of sugar and candy. She was about to leave, but Jack caught her by the arm. Come sit with us, Julia. I've got a lot to do. Well, well. Nanny looked at his daughter. You two lovebirds had a fight, didn't you? What happened, Julia? Why did you throw the boy into disgrace? Julia cast an indignant glance at her fiancé. It was my fault, Uncle Nani. Jack stood up for the bride. Julia is an intelligent and well-mannered girl. Chaste, and I was a fool to kiss her. She took offense at me. Forgive me, my love. I swear it won't happen again before the wedding. Nanny looked at his future son-in-law. Did you just want a kiss, or something else? No way, Uncle Nani. I know how you feel about such things. I just wanted a kiss. Tell me, Julia. Yes, Daddy. The girl let go of her eyes and blushed at having to lie to her father, but he understood it in his own way. Don't push a guy away. You can kiss him and let him kiss you. Moreover, he is your future husband. The girl blushed again. Oh, come on. Nanny turned to his future son-in-law again. "You're good for coming in. I just wanted to talk to you. Here's the thing. I got a job. It doesn't pay much, but it's steady." "That's what I'm saying. You've been working for Walker long enough, right? You've gained his trust." "Well," Jack was startled to realize what the man was getting at. "Maybe you could borrow some money from him. For me. And I'll give you a steady paycheck every paycheck." "Well, I don't know." Jack was frantically trying to figure out how to say no to the father of the bride. "Well, I could put him up as collateral for the house." "I don't think he'd give me that kind of money, even with your house as collateral." "Try me, Jack. I'll sign the house over to you when it's paid off." "All right, I'll try, Jack, hoping to stall for time and figure out how to say no. "All righty then. Come on, Julia, bring some liquor. Nanny and I will have a drink." "I won't, Uncle Nanny." "Well, I'll have a shot. Bring the decanter, Julia." The girl went into the kitchen. When she returned, Jack got up from his seat. "I'm gonna go, Uncle Nanny. Julia, will you walk me out?" The girl silently went to the exit. Already on the porch, she turned to the groom and looked at him sternly. "Julia, please forgive me. You're my most beautiful. Any man can't resist you for long, especially me. I love you very, very much, and I can't wait to be able to hug and kiss you." "All right," the girl smiled. She didn't want to take offense at Jack. "Really, what's wrong with the man you love wanting you? I forgive you." Jack leaned toward her and, noticing the girl's surprised look, whispered, "Only on the cheek." Julia smiled and set her lips to his. Gently kissing his bride, the guy headed home. But barely leaving the courtyard, his thoughts returned to his future father-in-law. How to refuse so that he was not offended and the relationship did not spoil. A few days passed. Jack tried to meet with his fiancée on neutral territory to avoid Nani's eyes, but coming to work one day, he was horrified to see his future father-in-law in Walker's living room. The men were sitting and chatting amiably. Noticing Jack, Nanny rose from his chair and smilingly rushed over to him. "This is my future son-in-law, John. Well, I think you know him. He works for you." "I do. Jack, get back to your duties. I'll talk to you later." Those words made the young man cold. What did that old geezer say to John? What would Walker do to him when the old man was gone? "You say there's no one else to go to but me." John looked at Nanny carefully. "Well, John," the man nodded, "I'm ashamed to say I've borrowed from everyone I can. My only hope is in you. I promise I'll pay you back every cent, at whatever interest rate you say. My son-in-law promised to help." "He's not your son-in-law yet." "Well, he will be soon. He and my daughter Julia are getting married." "They live together?" "Who? Julia and Jack?" Nanny waved his hands. No way. She was brought up strictly. Not until she's married. She won't even let me kiss her." "A rare girl." John smiled. "There are hardly any of them left now. You brought her up well, Nanny." "Well then," the man broke beaten. "I don't think a girl should get close to men before marriage. How about this, Nanny? I'll pay all your debts, give you money to repair the farm and whatever else you need to raise it, and you'll give me your daughter." "Which one?" "You have more than one." "I mean Julia." "But she's engaged. She's going to marry Jack." "Well, you're the head of the family. She's gonna marry whoever you say she's gonna marry." "What am I gonna tell Jack?" Nanny was so dumbfounded, he was practically talking on automatic. "I'll talk to Jack. Maybe I'll make him a good offer too. I don't know. This is all so sudden. You think about it. 3 days. And I'll come and see you in 3 days." "Okay." Nanny got up from his seat and walked towards the door, clutching his cap in his hands. Nanny couldn't find a place for himself. On one hand, solving all the problems in one fell swoop. On the other hand, his daughter's happiness. "Well, who says Julia won't be happy with John?" persuaded the man to himself. "And who says John will be a good husband?" appealed conscience. "John is a hard man. Such a wife to him is like a medieval king's breed and offspring. They'll nail her to the nail so that she won't dare to make a peep. And he'll have all the fun he wants. And your Julia will be a bird in a golden cage." Nanny's thoughts were interrupted by a phone call. "Razumov, Nanny." The lifeless voice in the receiver made the man break out in an icy sweat. "My name is Harry. I'm a specialist of the collection agency. I want to inform you that your debts have been transferred to us and we plan to visit you at your address." Please stay at home during this time, otherwise your property will be seized without you. You have no right. Nanny was indignant. Good day to you. There was a long beep on the phone. Jack walked slowly with Julia, walking her home. He really didn't want to see Nani, and at the same time, he really wanted to know what he talked to Walker about. Neither Julia, her father, nor Walker had said a word to him in the last couple of days. Jack was tortured by speculation, but he couldn't think of a single version of the conversation between his future father-in-law and his employer. A huge black Jeep was parked outside Julia's house. Jack knew this car well as John's car. What was he doing here? Oh, who's that? Julia looked at her fiancé in surprise. Isn't that your principal by any chance? Accidentally mine. Jack tried to see what was going on around the car, but there was a lull, so John came alone. What did he want at our house? Julia was puzzled. As if to answer her question, Julia's mother Lucy appeared on the porch. Julia, and you, Jack. Come on in. Jack wanted to refuse, but curiosity overcame fear. John and Nanny were sitting in the living room. John looked at them carefully. Then he turned his gaze only to Julia. I agree to your terms, but it's up to you to explain everything to my daughter and her fiancé. No problem. Good afternoon, Julia. The voice of the man who looked at her was pleasant. His gaze was direct and benevolent, not like she had seen when he looked at her from the Jeep. I have come to you to ask for your hand in marriage from your father. The girl's eyes widened in surprise. She looked quickly from father to mother, from mother to Jack, waiting for someone to tell her it was a joke. But there was complete silence. Her father and mother hid their eyes in the floor, Jack himself not understanding anything. You're a beautiful girl and I like you very much. John continued as if nothing had happened. I'll make sure you and your family have everything you need. You'll have everything you want. Dad, are you selling me out? Julia couldn't believe what she was saying. Daughter, otherwise we'll end up on the street. Nanny was afraid to look his daughter in the eye. I know what I'm doing is wrong, but think of Mom. She's in poor health. She can't bear to have everything we have taken away from us. You're covering for Mom? Julia couldn't believe her ears. Daughter, how can you do this? The girl rushed out of the house. Really, Uncle Nani? Jack, who had come to his senses, entered the conversation. Actually, Julia is my fiancée. We're getting married in a couple months. The subject. Nanny began, but John interrupted him. Jack, you'll find another girl, and you haven't had your fun yet. And if you want to have a good time before you get married, I won't hurt you either. I'll give you money. Buy yourself a nice car. Go out with the girls. You'll forget all about Julia. What do you need her for? That's none of your business. John's eyes are ice cold. So what's it gonna be? Do we have a deal? There was silence. Nanny was the first to rise from his seat. It's a deal, John. Everyone stared at Jack. Just as he held out his hand, Julia ran in. When she saw the triple handshake, she stopped and stared tearfully at the men. Oh yes, then I have a condition. The hail of tears that came up made it difficult for her to speak. Anything. John looked seriously at the new bride. I want a child, right away. I want to have someone who will truly love me. I don't want to see anyone else. She was so sick. She was ready to fall to the floor and howl, but she tried to hold on. She saw John's face change at the word baby, but she didn't care. Her family and the man she loved had sold her out. Good. Whatever you say. For the first time in his life, John looked confused. Shall we set a date then? If you can, John, pay your debts quickly. Ingratiatingly turn to the man Nanny, or else the debt collectors. Sure, I'll instruct my accountant. I'll have the accounts where the money is to be transferred, and the sums. John looked at Julia without taking his eyes off of her. And yes, I can move in with you right away, can I? Julia looked at John defiantly. My daddy is against relationships before marriage, she said, her voice becoming sarcastic. But if that's the case, I think he'd be okay with it. Of course he would. Let's go. Just one condition. What? More conditions? Yes, as my future spouse, you don't have to give me a hard time. And yes, John will be perfect. All right, John, let's go home. We're not welcome here. Julia strode out of the house with a loud clatter. John smiled and turned to the others and said, Well, that's it. It's all settled. I will transfer the money tomorrow. I'll call you to the wedding. and left the house. They drove to Walker's house in silence. Julia was shocked by her courage and recklessness, so she sat in silence, thinking over what had happened. John, too, was surprised. He hadn't expected a modest girl, brought up in puritanical views, to be so bold. And then there was that statement of hers about the baby. He never told anyone, but his hereditary disposition, received to him from his father, gave no guarantee of an heir. He could only have a child if he and his partner were a perfect match. So far, no lady could boast of that, no matter how hard they tried. "Come in, sweetheart." Selena understood without a word. She was always aware of everything that was going on with her ward. It had been so since his birth that John's grandmother's usual friend had become more than a relative. The man's parents had been too busy with themselves, and the grandmother had passed away barely a year old for the boy. Selena took on the role of grandmother and eventually stayed that way in the Walker household. And after John became a significant man and sent his parents to live on warm islands and became a member of his family, providing life, comfort, and love for the guy. "I'll get your room ready for you now, and you eat. I've got cabbage pie and freshly brewed tea." "My room?" Julia looked at John. "Isn't it?" "I will not violate your principles," smiled John, still looking at his future wife with interest. "Until the wedding, you will not move into my bedroom." "Thanks for that. The wedding is next week." John handed Julia a bank card. "Take my driver and go and buy everything you need." "I don't want no wedding. We can just sign the papers." Julia looked at John defiantly. "We can't. My friends and business partners won't understand me if I don't have a banquet for my wedding. And I don't want to lose favor with either of them. Besides, I promised your father I'd invite him. He's the one I really don't want to see." John came up to her and put his hand on her shoulder. "Don't act like a hurt little girl. What happened is what happened. Just accept it. Just accept that I was bought like a toy. And when you're done playing with me, what's gonna happen to me? Throw me away like a piece of junk?" He wanted to reassure her and tell her that he wasn't going to mistreat her. On the contrary, he would make her the mistress of his house, whom everyone would respect and listen to. And he would not allow himself to treat her without proper respect. But instead he said, "I haven't started playing yet, so don't get too far ahead of yourself." And after handing her the card, he walked briskly to the exit, adding on the way, "I'll send you my chauffeur and my assistant. She'll help you with the shopping." The front door slammed. Julia stood in the middle of the living room with the card in her hand. She wanted to immediately throw that card to the floor and stomp on it until it cracked, but John's voice in her head sobered her. "Don't act like a hurt little girl. Just accept it." "Well, it's really time to stop acting like a hurt little girl," the girl decided. "Since I've been forced to accept this situation, I'll try to make the most of it." Julia made her way to the dining room, where Selena was in charge. Upon seeing the girl, the old woman brightened up. "You're awake. Did you see John off?" "No. He and I met by chance in the lobby. He handed me a card." Julia waved a piece of plastic. "He cares," Selena smiled, putting breakfast in front of the girl. "Thank you," Julia thanked, thinking to herself, how would she want to get through this wedding? How to look her parents in the eye and stay calm? How to kiss a total stranger in front of everyone? "You don't think John's bad?" Selena sat down next to Julia. "It's his business that's made him so stiff and unsmiling. But he's actually a very kind and good boy. He would never hurt his own, and he certainly wouldn't allow himself to hurt his family. Believe me. I've known him since he was this old." The woman showed her palm just below her knees. "What kind of family am I to him? He and I don't know each other at all. We've never even spoken. And anyway, he bought me." Julia wanted to pound the table with her fist, but restrained herself. "Oh, come on, honey." Selena stroked her head. "How can you buy a man? He just helped your family and saved you from a bad boyfriend. And the fact that he wants to marry you is because he likes you." "Yes. How am I supposed to live with someone I don't like? It's not like we're gonna live in adjoining rooms. John wouldn't do anything to hurt you." At that time, the telephone rang and the old woman rushed to the receiver. In a minute, she was back by the girl's side. "Julia, get ready. Naomi is on her way." "Who's Naomi?" "Steppa's assistant. You're going shopping with her." The car was parked on the porch. Next to it, leaning spectacularly against it, was a photo model. Julia couldn't have called her anything else. Fashionable hairstyle, stylish, expensive office clothes and shoes. "Hello, Julia," Naomi sang, "and give her something from your stock." The old woman readily began rummaging through the countless drawers of the dresser in the dining room. Meanwhile, John rose from the table and silently walked out. He was gone several minutes. During that time, Celine managed to find the right herb and brew it. When the man came back into the dining room, Julia was already drinking the infusion. "I have to go to the office. Naomi and her stylist will be here in an hour. Then, at 13:30, a car will come to pick you up and take you to the registry office." "And you?" Julia was surprised. "Why do you need me?" "Well, what about the redemption? Contests? Dancing with tambourines?" Finally, the girl was clearly becoming hysterical. John looked questioningly at Selena, but she just shrugged her shoulders. The effects of the weed hadn't kicked in yet. Then he looked at the bride again and said as calmly as he could, "You wanted a modest wedding. So while I'll be at work, you calmly pack and come to the registry office. By that time I'll be there. We'll get married. We'll have a little banquet at the restaurant and go home. No ransom payments, no bitter, and no dancing with tambourines." John was about to turn to leave, but then he realized, "Oh yeah, put this on." He placed a flat velvet box in front of Julia and walked briskly out. The girl slowly shifted her gaze from the box to the exit of the dining room and back again until Selena exclaimed, "Come on, open it quickly." The box contained a lovely necklace of white and clear beads and earrings of the same kind. Ah, both women exhaled. "It must be worth a fortune." Selena shook her head. "Beautiful," whispered Julia, "but the beads are heavy. They're not plastic." "What is it?" "Pearls and diamonds, I think." "Are you serious?" Julia looked at the old lady with rounded eyes. "Well, John's not gonna go for cheap costume jewelry or expensive jewelry either, so the stones are natural." Soon Naomi arrived, and with her another woman who introduced herself as Ellen. All the rest of the time Ellen conjured up Julia's appearance, and when the girl before leaving the house looked at herself in the mirror, she was stunned. She looked at her, a princess, which are drawn to children in fairy tale books. She couldn't believe her eyes that she could be so beautiful. Celine saw her and wept when she saw her. The old woman was also dressed nicely and had even put on lipstick. "Ah, and the jewelry," she exclaimed when they were all together on the threshold of the house and rushed into the dining room. When she came back with the box, she quickly opened it and helped Julia put it on. "Now you're a princess for sure." The old woman voiced Julia's thoughts aloud. The same security guard who had driven with them to the mall was driving the limousine. Julia was about to breathe a sigh of relief when she saw that the limo had an escort, a big black Jeep in which Jack was getting in. "What are they for?" she asked Naomi, nodding at the Jeep. "So you don't get stolen on the way." Naomi answered in all seriousness. "Stolen? Me?" Julia was surprised. "Yes." "Why?" "For ransom." Julia looked at Selena for support, but she was already in the limousine, smiling and looking out the window, sipping champagne. "You should have a sip of champagne too," Naomi advised Julia. "I don't know. Can I?" For the first time, Naomi's face went from impassive to surprised. "Drink it." Selena joined the conversation. "It's a weak herb. A little wine will make it a little stronger, but don't get carried away." Naomi's face took on its former expression, and she immediately handed Julia a glass of champagne. The wedding house was crowded at the door. Guests, the curious who had come to watch a powerful businessman get married, and the gawkers who passed by. John felt like an idiot in a tea suit with a bouquet and a bride's bouquet in his hands. In everyday life, he preferred a less formal style, without ties, vests, and sometimes even limited to a shirt. But here, he shifted nervously from foot to foot and looked around. Was she doing it on purpose? Where the hell are they? She was probably hysterical. Nanny came up to him with an ingratiating smile. "John, did we get anything wrong? Is it too early?" John looked at his future father-in-law. After he had paid all his debts for him, his hands stopped shaking and the vapor on his forehead. "Nanny, don't fuss. We're still 5 minutes away from the signing. And even if Julia will be late like all the other girls, it's okay to wait for us." From the anger at the late bride in the voice of John could be heard metal. Of course, Nanny babbled and turned to his wife, who was standing nearby. Finally, the limo showed in the distance, followed by the security car. John breathed a sigh of relief, deciding that he would be sure to talk to Julia about her punctuality. But when the cars pulled up and the security guard jumped out and opened the door where Julia had appeared, John forgot all about it. It seemed to him that he flew somewhere high up into the clouds, where there was no city noise, crowds of people and bustle. An unearthly creature of heavenly beauty was floating to meet him. He couldn't believe that this fairy would be his in a few minutes. "Sorry, I'm late, John. We had an accident on the way into town. We had to take a detour." Naomi's quiet voice brought him to his senses. Julia stood in front of him with a slight smile on her face and a blank stare. He held out the bouquet to her and she took it. Tucking it under her arm, she followed him. In the lobby, Naomi took the girl to the mirror to help fix her outfit and hair. "Selena, what's wrong with Julia?" John's voice to his grandmother was quiet but menacing. "Weed and champagne," she explained. "What are you doing? Are you crazy?" "Calm down. Weed is harmless. It's good for calming you down." That champagne made it seem a little indifferent. "Well, that's good for you. Julia won't throw a tantrum at the most important moment." "Yes, she'll throw a temper tantrum." "Come on, there are no side effects from weed. Julia understands and is aware. Just be cool." The music started and everyone rushed into the auditorium. The ceremony was perfect. Julia said yes with the same smile, confidently put the ring on John's finger, and even snuggled up to him for a kiss. John's hands were shaking and he felt hot and cold. Even in the most violent of squabbles he was calm. But here, Selena should have had some pot, came to his mind. But from the outside it seemed that the bride and groom were quite happy and calm. Then they accepted congratulations. Julia was still calm as well, and John had calmed down. However, when the turn came to congratulate Julia's parents, the man noticed how the newlywed wife flashed in the eyes of anger. She did not allow her parents to embrace her, and the flowers they presented her with a nod of her head told her to take Naomi. John tensed in anticipation of a scandal, but at the same time his wife turned to him and smiled. Once again he felt like he was flying into the clouds. Without realizing it, he pulled her to him and kissed her. Julia did not resist. He felt dizzy and had no strength to pull away from her. The guests shouted loudly and applauded. After struggling with himself, John pulled away from his wife and suddenly realized he was embarrassed. Jack stood there, barely able to contain his anger. He wanted to rush over to the newlyweds and tear John away from Julia. It was he, Jack, who should be kissing this girl now, not Walker. He seemed to Jack now an unprincipled, insolent, fraudulent scoundrel who had gained power and money by deceit. "Get your filthy paws off her, you creep. Julia was supposed to be my woman. You have no rights to her at all. You think that if you have power and money behind you, you can control people's destinies." Jack's fists involuntarily clenched and unclenched. He shifted his gaze to Julia. She was fabulously beautiful. Who would have thought that from a plain pretty girl she would turn into such a beauty? And this one is good too. Jack's thoughts turned to Julia. As soon as that went through her bling, she forgot all about it at once. She's looking at his mouth with devotion. She can't even see her parents. Jack reached for a glass of champagne, which was being served by a passing waiter, but he heard it. Are you out of your fucking mind?" The head of security was standing next to him. "Who authorized you? Or do you think the owner will give everyone a break on the occasion of marriage? Get back to your duties." Jack glared sullenly at his boss and put his glass on the waiter's tray. He was choked with anger and hatred. He'd been told off like a brat and in front of the waiter, although in fact, he is also an attendant at this celebration of life. Good for Julia. She's soaring high. She's gonna be so proud. We've got to get her to take revenge for all the humiliation Jack endured at Walker's house. "I understand why you're stalling, but this is the last dance. We're going home." John, her eyes looked at him pleadingly. "It's going to happen anyway. Why procrastinate? What's in it for you? At least I'll be prepared. You've had almost 2 weeks to do this. That's it." After the dance, John informed the guests that they were leaving. There were joking shouts and wishes for a good night. Red with embarrassment, Julia literally flew out of the restaurant. They drove home in silence. If John was as calm as if he were taking a walk, Julia was uneasy, and every now and then she glanced at John with pitying glances. There was no one in the house. Selena had stayed at the restaurant to finish the wedding, and John had left the guards outside the door. As soon as they entered the house, He immediately drew her to him and gave her a long, tender kiss. His palms gently stroked her back, her shoulders, her neck, the back of her neck. Without breaking away from her lips, he picked her up in his arms and carried her upstairs. The girl closed her eyes and tried not to think about what would happen next. In the bedroom, he set her on the floor and finally pulled away from her lips. Looking into her eyes, John carefully removed her necklace and unzipped her dress. "I'll be back in a minute," he said, and left the bedroom. It was only then that Julia realized that she had barely been breathing the whole time. She exhaled heavily and looked around. John's bedroom was the most masculine. No pretty pictures or knickknacks. Flowers were out of the question. How would she be in here? But maybe she'll only come here at night. And not every night? On the bed was the silk nightgown and a robe of the same kind that Selena had prepared. Julia grinned. What was the point of wearing that if it didn't hide much? By the time John returned, Julia was already sitting on the bed, her hair out of her elaborate hairdo and wrapped in a sheet. He entered with a tray containing a bucket of ice and a bottle of champagne, 2 glasses and a vase of fruit. "Did you like the combination?" he asked calmly, as if he wasn't surprised at the sight of his wife. "I don't see the point of it. It doesn't hide anything, and I figured you'd take it off anyway." Julia was shaking again. John saw her condition, and he wanted to hold her close and never let her go. And so he did. "Calm down, my darling. I won't hurt you. I won't hurt you. Trust me. Everything will be all right." "Then perhaps postpone?" Julia asked, encouraged by his words. John stood up, took off his jacket, vest, bow tie, and unbuttoned his shirt. Then he poured champagne into glasses and sat down next to the girl again, holding out one of the glasses to her. "We're not going to put anything off. Trust me, the sooner you're mine, the sooner you'll get used to it." He took a sip from the glass. Julia followed suit. "In time, I hope you'll start to like it." He looked at the girl. Julia finished her blast in one gulp. He took it from her and nestled his lips on hers again. Julia woke up slowly. The dream would not let her go. Without opening her eyes, she stretched until her joints crunched and opened her eyes. She closed them immediately, trying to forget everything that had happened that night. Her and John. Yes, he had made her his after all. Julia sat up on the bed. She looked around. Next to her on the ottoman was a nice robe, not like yesterday. There were house slippers by the bed. "Selena," smiled Julia and immediately shuddered. "Did she come in here while I was sleeping? Dressed like that? We need to get out of here right away. John has probably left by now. We can retire to our room and relive the whole thing there." The girl dressed quickly and went out into the hallway. As she went downstairs, she heard voices. Who could it be? John was sitting in the dining room, eating pancakes with appetite, greedily drinking coffee. At the sight of her husband eating breakfast, Julia's mouth watered. She suddenly realized how hungry she was. "There's Julia," Selena smiled. "Come, sit down quickly. I'll feed you while it's hot." Julia glanced at the clock hanging on the wall, 10:30. What a sleeper she was. Why wasn't John at work? Before she could think about it, her husband jumped up from his seat, and the next moment she was in his arms. "Good morning, darling," he said and kissed her right on the lips. In front of Selena. Julia blushed thickly. Ignoring her redness, John led her to the table and helped her sit down. "Good morning," she whispered, afraid to look up. "Julia, would you like some jam, condensed milk, or sour cream with your pancakes?" She heard the old woman's voice. "I recommend jam," John advised. He acted as if everything that was going on was understandable and natural. Selena was a master at rolling berries. Julia nodded. Then, daringly, she asked, "Why aren't you at work?" Overcoming her embarrassment, she looked at her husband. "I'm on my honeymoon." He smiled and looked at her fondly. "The next few days I am all yours." Julia averted her eyes and concentrated on her breakfast. Her head rumbled and her cheeks began to burn. "What kind of honeymoon is this?" Selena's nagging voice sounded distant. "Normal newlyweds fly to resorts, and you keep a young wife at home." "Don't grumble, Selena. We'll go too. We'll get Julia's papers and then we'll go. Right, Julia?" He put his palm over her hand. The girl couldn't speak and nodded. "And today we'll go to a wonderful place." Julia was gradually getting used to her husband. He did not want to hear about her coming to his room only to spend the night. On the contrary, he insisted on her moving in with him. If you're not satisfied with the interior, you can do it your way. I won't mind. You are not limited in funds, so feel free to do whatever you think necessary. After a little thought, Julia launched a global renovation. A team of finishers was called in. New furniture was ordered. On the first evening, when John's room was completely emptied of furniture and prepared for repair, Julia took refuge in her room and waited anxiously for his reaction. He would probably be angry that she had deprived him of his bedroom and herself. But John returned from work, and upon learning that the bedroom had begun renovations, headed straight for his spouse's former room. Upon entering, he quietly undressed, while Julia was afraid to breathe, and got into bed with her. How long is this going to last? I don't know. You better hurry up, or they'll spend a year doing this repair. I really like the view from the window. And there's a terrace. You have a terrace? Julia forgot her fear of her husband. You've got it. John laughed. You've been living in my bedroom for so long and you don't know I have a terrace? To be honest, I only come there at night, she whispered. John raised himself on his elbow and looked at her mockingly. What is it that scared you so much there? Without me? Just. Julia searched for the right words. Julia, John was tired of waiting for a clear answer. You have nothing to be afraid of here. This is your home. And I'm yours too. You are the mistress of this house and your word is law. What about you? Julia looked at her husband in surprise. And my word is law. But if the others have to fulfill our laws strictly, then between us these laws are negotiable. Therefore, I beg you, tell me what is troubling you. I will certainly try to dispel all your worries. I am still shy. Julia blushed, not knowing how to continue. Sleeping with me? John said it so openly that she wanted to fall under the ground. Julia, oh great again. You're my wife, there's nothing wrong with that. It's all natural. Julia was silent, afraid to breathe. All right, and this problem we will solve, softly said the man. Now come to me. Julia is probably walking around the garden, answered John's silent question Selena as he ran down from the second floor. Today was Friday, and he had gotten off early. The weather was lovely, despite the proximity of fall. He'd gotten a call from Max in the morning, suggesting a weekend get-together. What, your young wife has got you so rounded up that you've forgotten all about your friends? Laughed his comrade. Let's go somewhere while the last warm days are here. I have my fishing cabin idle. Let's do it, John agreed. Julia's probably sick of being cooped up in my house too. That's fine. Then drive right over there. You don't need to take anything. I've already prepared everything. You bug. John laughed. How did you know I'd agree? You're my friend. I have a bet feeling. John quickly finished his work and rushed home. It was the perfect opportunity to be with Julia outside. Perhaps in the wilderness, she would be a little more relaxed and not so wary and inhibited. And being with other women besides Selena wouldn't hurt her. Inspired, John, barely saying hello to the old woman, flew to the second floor. After her spouse had remodeled the bedroom to her liking, she had accepted it as her room, and even began to behave more relaxed. John was glad of this and played along with her in every way possible, asking where he had this or that thing now. Sometimes he dropped a statue on purpose so that he could pick it up guiltily and apologize. Julia wasn't in the bedroom. Maybe she's in the kitchen, helping Selena. The old lady had been given clear instructions not to suspend the girl if she wanted to cook or help around the house. The man ran downstairs. When he heard that Julia was in the garden, he ran upstairs again. From the terrace, he could see the whole garden and he hoped that he would find his wife faster. As soon as John stepped onto the terrace, he saw her at once. She was standing with her back to him, talking to Jack. From the look on his face, he was asking her for something. John saw the guard's hands reach for Julia. He couldn't take it anymore. Julia, his voice resounded over the garden. The girl immediately turned and looked at him. There was consternation on her face. Go inside. Turning around, John walked into the bedroom and paced from corner to corner. What was that? While he was going out of his way to please her, to attract her, to get her to believe him. And she, it turns out, can't do it, not because she's shy, but because she has another man on her mind. A frightened Julia ran into the bedroom. John, what's wrong? Get dressed. John, on the other hand, began to undress. I'll take a quick shower and we'll go to the lake." After taking off the last of his clothes, he slammed the bathroom door without looking at his wife. Julia remained standing like a stumbling block. What had gotten into him? Why was he so angry and rude? What had she done? Was it because he saw her talking to Jack? Did he think that? When John came out of the bath, Julia was still standing in the middle of the room. "Why haven't you?" he asked glumly. "I'm not going anywhere with you in this mood." Julia shouted. "You'll have to. You're my wife." "That's right, not property or even a servant." Julia defiantly turned away to the window. An angry John flew toward her, and his hands froze a millimeter from her shoulders. "Julia," he said, trying to restrain himself from shouting, "get ready." "I won't." Not knowing what to do, John pulled away from his wife so as not to accidentally hurt her. He went to the dresser and pounded his fist on it with all of his might. From the blow from his thighs flew off the towel, and at this time just turned Julia with a determined look on her face and with the words, "You know." Seeing her husband in a nude style, she darted her eyes, then tried to turn away sharply, but caught herself on the carpet and flew to the floor. John's reaction was lightning fast. He quickly jumped up to his wife and caught her at the floor. Then he lowered himself to the floor and sat her on his lap. Both were silent, breathing heavily. The closeness of her body had completely erased from his mind everything he had been thinking about a moment ago. All he wanted now was to use their bedroom for its intended purpose. "If you could think of me. After everything they've done to me, like that, I don't want to talk to you." Julia tried to speak as forcefully as she could, but her husband's passionate eyes made her voice shake. "We'll talk about it later," John said softly and nestled his lips against hers. Julia liked to walk in the garden. John's garden was magnificent. Lots of flowers, fruit trees, shrubs, artificial streams with bridges, and a couple of gazebos. One of them was for a large company, with a large table, sofas around, and a barbecue. The other, on the contrary, was for intimate privacy, wrapped with grates outside and decorated with curtains inside. After the wedding, John spent weekends at home, but they were still not together much. Her husband worked more in his office than socializing with her. They met only during lunch, dinner, and of course at night. The girl still could not dare to ask him to take her somewhere, to the theater, to a concert, at least in the cinema. This is such a paradox. Before she had someone to go with, but there was no money for it. Now there was enough money, but there was no one to go with. The company of security guards didn't suit her. She shared this with Selena, and Selena rounded her eyes and exclaimed, "So why are you silent, my dear? He's your husband. You can demand anything you want from him." She said, "I want to go to the theater." He has no idea that in addition to eating and dressing, you may want something else. He, like you, is new to marriage, so he doesn't know what a woman needs. And he's a man. Men don't know what they want until you tell them what you want. On Friday, as usual, having had breakfast, Julia went to the gazebo taking a book. But reading did not give. In her head was spinning how to ask John to take her to the theater. After struggling for a couple of hours, the girl decided, "I'll ask him directly. What's the big deal? He promised he'd do everything he could to make me happier." She slammed the book shut and rushed into the house, needing to ask Selena to make John's favorite dish and back her up when Julia would ask for the theater. "Julia," a quiet voice made her stop. Jack appeared from the bushes planted along the path. "Julia, wait please. Let's talk. Do we have something to talk about?" The girl was so preoccupied with her thoughts that she was not immediately surprised that Jack dared to speak to her after all he had done. "Yes, I realize what I did was wrong, but please listen to me." "Bad? You sold me out." Julia had no anger toward him. It was in the past. She was just stating a fact. "Your father wouldn't have let us get married after Walker proposed anyway. And if I'd fought back, I wouldn't have gotten the money and I'd have been fired from my job. You can't blame this on your father. My father was in a desperate situation, and he was right to sell me because you confirmed that you didn't care about me either. You didn't hesitate to do the same thing." "No, I tried." "You didn't try anything. You regretted your offer to help pay off your father's loan, didn't you? Isn't that why you were so tight-lipped after the first handout? Is that why you got excited about Walker's offer?" "Julia, yes, I'm a fool. I'm sorry. I realize what I did was terrible. I've realized that I can't be without you. I dream about you night after night. I literally tear myself to pieces when I imagine him with you. How you are with him. I should have been him. But you were cowardly. That's why it's John. Julia, I know what it's like for you to go to bed with him. I don't feel good about it myself. You're not happy that my innocence was given to someone else. Not that I married someone else, but that you expected to get it and then brag to your friends about what a good wife you have, and that you're the only man I've got. But that's the only reason Walker married you. Let him. At least he didn't hide it by using words of love. He'll play with you and leave you. So be it, even if it's true on shore. He'll tell me directly and compensate me for moral damage. It's better than living with a lying, mercantile, and corrupt man. Julia was getting angry. Jack was pissing her off and throwing her off her thoughts about her upcoming conversation with John. Julia? Jack held out his hands to her. Julia. They had already traveled quite far from the house, but they still hadn't said a word to each other. Julia stared out the window at the woods, while John drove the car with concentration. Their quarrel, which had ended so abruptly, did not allow them to continue their relationship. What kind of relationship could there be after something like this? Julia realized for the first time why her husband was so eager on a daily basis. That passion that came over her was like a hurricane, like a tsunami. At the memory of it, her body began to tremble and her face turned red. She remembered with shame her sudden reaction to his caresses and how she herself had responded to him. They were greeted with cheer and welcome. John was immediately handed a shot of vodka, Julia a glass of wine. Having reacquainted with everyone, the girl was carried away into the general merriment. It turned out that while they were on their way, the male part of the company had already caught fish and it was now exuding an appetizing odor fried on the grill. Gradually, everyone got tired of loud talking and dancing around the fire and sat down in two groups around two tables, men separately, women separately. The girls Julia met were friendly and unobtrusive. They did not seek to pry about Julia's personal life or the details of her marriage to John. She was easy and pleasant in this company. From time to time, the girl cast glances in the direction of the men. John, too, seemed relaxed and serene. Sometimes she caught his gaze and remembered the previous day again. "Oh, my eyes are getting sleepy," one of the girls, Ariana, said with a laugh. "Vasilik, isn't it time to go to bed?" She shouted to the men. Of course it's time. A tall, burly man, who didn't fit that call sign, got up from a neighboring table. Realizing that she would now have to be alone with her husband, Julia trembled. Their conversation was not over. Her reaction to her last intimacy with her husband would surely raise more questions for him. Rising from her chair, she staggered. "I think she's drunk. Let's take a little walk." Julia heard behind her and immediately felt her husband's arm around her shoulders. They walked slowly down the path to the lake. John was silent, but Julia couldn't say a word. They reached the lake and walked along the shore. John still had his arm around Julia's shoulders. What's the matter with him? They had gone far enough from the path. Julia decided that her husband just wanted her to get some fresh air to weed out the alcohol. The sound of his voice made her wince. "Nothing," she replied. "You didn't even ask with whom." "What difference does it make? I don't have any other men besides you to socialize with." Joan stopped and turned her to face him. He looked intently into her eyes, as if searching for a hidden answer to his question. "What were you talking about?" Julia wanted to be indignant, to exclaim, "What kind of interrogation is this? Why do I have to justify myself to you?" But when she looked at her husband's face, she realized that it was of the utmost importance to him. He apologized and wanted us to start over. A fresh start at what? Julia saw John's cheekbones tense on his face. "Well, you know that before I married you, I dated Jack. We were even going to get married, but he sold me out and betrayed me. He told me today that he's sorry and wants us to start over. What about you?" John suddenly relaxed and only his eyes were still penetratingly staring into hers. "Step, what are you doing?" Julia decided to take offense. "Yes, you and I did not marry for love. And our relationship is far from a perfect family, but that doesn't mean I'm going to seek comfort from another man." She turned away from him and walked slowly along the shore. "What's the matter with you? One betrays, the other doesn't trust." In her heart, she hoped that after today their relationship would become closer, more trusting. And not as in ordinary families, but not for appearance's sake. She didn't hear John catch up with her. She felt his arm around her shoulders. They walked in silence for a few more minutes. "Julia, we've gone far enough. Let's go back." The girls silently turned back. All the way to the path, they did not utter a word. Julia started to climb first, but John caught her arm and turned her around. As they climbed, Julia was on the same level with him. Now she could look him in the face without lifting her head. "Julia, I'm sorry," said her husband quietly. "I didn't mean to offend you with my suspicions. It's just that it seems to me that I am jealous of you." Jealous. Julia looked carefully into her husband's eyes. She tried to find there the answer to her dumb question. Jealous as a woman or as property? But in his eyes there was tenderness and despair. Taking his face in her palms, Julia gently kissed her spouse. From surprise, John froze, but as soon as the girl broke away from his lips, he immediately pressed her to him and continued her kiss. "Let's go inside," Julia whispered, panting between kisses, and immediately felt her husband's hands lifting her into the air. All the next day, the company rested to the fullest. They swam in the lake, despite the already cold water, competed with each other to catch fish, then grilled them. In the afternoon, we stoked the sauna and took turns steaming, and for dinner we grilled kebabs again and sat around the fire. All day, Julia caught her husband's passionate glances. From time to time, John found himself next to her and kissed her. At first, she was embarrassed, though she wanted to kiss him, but then she noticed that the other couple showed tenderness to each other and were not ashamed of it. After her discovery, she herself occasionally kissed her husband. I wondered, Julia thought on the way home, is our new relationship staying there in the fishing cabin or coming home with us? She glanced furtively at John. He was driving calmly. Nothing betrayed in him what had happened to them in those 2 days. "If you want, I'll fire him," Julia, preoccupied with her own thoughts, didn't immediately realize what her husband was talking about. "Who?" "That Jack of yours. He's not mine. Anyway, I don't care. You know who to fire. It's just, maybe you don't like seeing him. I don't see him, and even if he's in my line of sight, I don't care. And anyway, John, what's the big deal? I think we've got it all figured out. If it makes you feel better, fire him." John is silent. Really, what was wrong with him? Why doesn't he trust Julia, or is it jealousy? But if she was having an affair with her ex, he'd know about it immediately. Why is he trying to hear her refute his suspicions? The man looked at his wife. She was staring out the window, thinking about something of her own, her brow furrowed slightly. John remembered how she had kissed him on the path, the first time. How their relationship had changed after he'd seen her in the garden talking to Jack. All this time, from the day of the wedding until the day before yesterday, he had dreamed of the day when she would want him for herself, when she would awaken the passion he'd been missing all this time. And now it had happened. He hoped that after that his interest in her would fade, but it turned out the opposite. He was afraid of losing her. That's the reason for his jealousy. "Julia, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to offend you with my suspicions. You and I have become so close these last few days. I'm beginning to hope that we'll have a normal family with a good relationship between us, and I'm ruining it with my stupid questions." "In a normal family, spouses love each other," Julia said quietly, looking down at her feet. John pulled over and stopped the car. Then he turned to his wife. "Julia, look at me." The girl turned around. "What's stopping us from loving each other? After this weekend, I thought it might be possible. Is it possible to fall in love by choice? I don't know, but maybe you should just, not fight your feelings. Don't look for some kind of barrier to them. Maybe just, do what you want to do. Step. Yeah, I don't understand. I don't know. Let me start." John pulled her to him. "I really want to kiss you right now. I'm going to kiss you." It was a long time before John was able to pull away from his wife's lips. "If we don't stop now," he said, breathing hard, "we won't get home until nightfall." "Toward night," Julia echoed after him. "Sounds like fun." Jack couldn't find a place to go. He was desperately short of money. His new girlfriend wouldn't even hear of going for a car ride or going to a cafe. It had to be the best restaurant, the best club, and once a week a nice trinket in the form of the latest model phone, jewelry, or shopping at the mall. How many times had Jack berated himself for his rashness? Why did he listen to his coworkers? What was he hoping for? He'd never had girlfriends like that in his life. He couldn't afford them. And now, there's no turning back or he'll admit he's worthless. Jack had saved almost all his paycheck. He just didn't know what to do with it. He had his car. He had his newfangled cell phone. After going to the mall once, he bought himself so many things that it seemed he had enough for the rest of his life. And that was it. That was the end of his fantasy. No, of course he wanted to have his own villa on the islands, a maid and a beauty who would give him massages in the evenings, but he had no money for that. His plans to siphon money from Julia, who he had seduced, were not being realized. The girl did not notice him. Moreover, Jack saw her in the garden one day. She was with John. The couple strolled along the garden paths in an embrace, cooed sweetly, and occasionally kissed. John, always frowning and impenetrable, now seemed like a young man in love, gazing adoringly at his princess. Julia's behavior did not please him either. The girl looked at her husband with tenderness, stroked his face, ran her fingers through his hair at the back of his head, which seemed to make him purr like a contented cat. But what hurt Jack most of all was the fact that the couple periodically stopped to kiss. A little more, and he would not see Julia's favor, and consequently, her husband's millions. It was urgent to do something. His partner came up with the idea. I met this chick at the club last night. She's got a great figure, legs and face. I drank her the most expensive cocktails all night, and she wouldn't even let me see her off. The daughter of some deputy turned out to be such an asshole, but the girl's hot, but I'll still get what I want. How is it interesting? Jack grinned, thinking at the same time about his own. I have a friend who works in this club. He's a security guard too. He gave me her number. I'm gonna call her, ask her out. It'll cost a lot of money, but this chick's worth it. And then Jack had an idea. What if he could find some chick and show Julia that he's better than her husband? That he's got the prettiest, richest girls falling for him, and that he can afford a girl like that. That's when Julia will start to bite her elbows. That's when she'll start to favor him. All they'll have to do is keep her warm. The next weekend, Jack went to a club. It didn't take long to meet the hottie. The girl was like the cover of a magazine. She favorably accepted from Jack expensive cocktails and even gave her phone number. A week later, the young man was already presented to Sabrina's parents, very rich businessmen. Jack was at first frightened by such haste, but then he rejoiced. The more serious his relationship will seem, the sooner Julia will fall into his arms. Even if she doesn't fall, Sabrina is a perfect reserve airfield. But only this reserve airfield required constant refueling in the form of expensive gifts and trips to clubs and restaurants. All that Jack had accumulated was melting away at a catastrophic rate. He had to do something, either marry Sabrina or pursue Julia. He was desperately reluctant to marry, for Sabrina had a feisty temper. So the only thing left to do was to win back Julia's love. To his displeasure, Julia rarely left the house alone, and even when she did, his fellow guards were everywhere, preventing Jack from being able to approach her and talk to her. The only thing left to do was to catch Julia in the house, but only the head of security and those he pointed out were allowed in the house. Jack was beginning to despair when he inadvertently overheard John and Julia talking during a walk in the garden. Julia, what do you mean, I can't? You're my wife and you're obliged to update your closet regularly, especially since it's winter. What would my business partners say if my wife showed up in a simple coat? Why would I show up in front of them? Why? Soon there will be receptions, banquets, and charity events. We have to attend them. Why? Why? At the end of the year, every self-respecting oligarch must make a grand gesture of charity, and his wife should sparkle with furs and diamonds. John kissed his wife on the cheek. You're making it up. Julia laughed and kissed her husband back. I wouldn't dream of it. Julia, you wanted to go to the theater, to the exhibition. Selena told me. Okay, but don't scold me later for being a spender. I'll scold you if you're not a spender. Then go tomorrow. What's the rush? We're having dinner with one of my partners this weekend. I knew there was a reason you were pushing me around. Of course there's a reason. That's as far as Jack went. Julia's going shopping tomorrow. He has to be at the same mall, and preferably not alone. Let Julia see him with Sabrina first, realize his loss, and become more loyal to his advances. Except, to invite Sabrina to the mall, he'd need money first. Jack rushed to borrow money from his co-workers. To avoid boredom and not to be confused alone in the mall, Julia called Ariana, a girl she met at the fishing lodge on the lake. She readily agreed. They agreed to meet at the place. When Julia drove up to the shopping center, Ariana was already waiting for her, but she wasn't alone. With her impatiently tapping her heels, stood Kira, another new acquaintance from the lake. "Julia, you don't mind, do you?" Kira made a doll face and fluttered her long eyelashes. "It's been so long since I've been shopping." "No way. No way. Let's go, girls." They had already been walking around the mall for hours when Ariana pleaded. "Girls, let's get something to eat. I'm exhausted and I'd like to go somewhere else." "Come on." Kira and Julia readily agreed. Julia thought that she was going to fall into the cart, which one of the guards was driving behind them. She was about to suggest a rest, but Ariana beat her to it. Fortunately, they were not far from a small restaurant where they immediately rushed to. After ordering, the girls were chatting casually when a familiar voice sounded next to Julia. "Julia, hello." A brightly painted girl on high heels stood next to Jack and looked at Julia with an appraising look. "Hi, I didn't expect to see you here." "Why not?" "Well, just." Julia didn't say anything, which made him uncomfortable. "We went shopping with Sabrina, too, to relax." Julia nodded. She wasn't in the mood for conversation. The only thing she was happy about was that her ex-fiancé had a girlfriend and wouldn't be stalking Julia now. Bye. Jack was embarrassed that Julia wasn't eager to talk to him. Sabrina didn't seem to be impressed with her either. "Bye." "Julia? Who's that?" Ariana looked at her friend in surprise. "It's one of John's guards." Julia was quiet for a moment, gathering her wits, "and my ex-fiancé." "Come on." Kira, as if seeing Julia for the first time, scrutinized her. "Interesting." "Nothing interesting. Everything is banal and prosaic." "Julia, come on. Do you promise that this will stay between us and not go anywhere?" "We promise." The girls nodded their heads eagerly. Julia, trying to appear calm, told how she had become John's wife. Then she looked at her friends, waiting for their reaction. "Well, what you just told me, I, for example, knew it," Kara stretched out. "And me," Ariana confirmed. "John didn't hide it from anyone, I don't think. But to be honest, when I first saw you two together over the weekend, I thought it was just an embellished fabrication by our men." "Why?" Julia was afraid to hear what they thought of her. "So you look like real newlyweds on your honeymoon. John was staring at you all weekend, and you blushed every time he looked at you. So we thought John's so-called purchase of you was just a crude joke. There you go, you're blushing again. So what's next?" "What do you mean, what's next?" "What's next for you and John now? Don't tell me you're living as roommates." "Well, we have a good relationship. John's very attentive and caring. I try to take care of him too. We've decided that we're gonna try to be a real family. And this one, what's his name?" "Jack. What about him?" Kira squinted her eyes at Julia. "Well, to be honest, he caught me at the weekend when I was out of the garden. Talked me into starting over. He told me he loved me." "And you?" Ariana's eyes lit up with such details, and she even leaned towards Julia. "I told him it was over between us, and that I could never forgive him for such a betrayal. I had my eyes open to him. I can't believe I loved him for so many years and dreamed of marrying him. But he could set you up with John. I know John's a man who doesn't compromise." Kira was still squinting at Julia. "We talked to him about it," Julia shrugged. "When? How?" Both girls stared and moved forward, as if afraid they'd miss a word. "He saw Jack stop me in the garden and talk to me. I explained to Stepa that I wasn't going to turn back to the past, and if he didn't trust me, he could file for divorce. I don't want to live in suspicion." "What about John?" "John said he trusts me. Anyway, Jack's already got a girlfriend. I think he's forgotten all about me." "A girlfriend, you say?" Kara grinned wickedly. "Why?" Julia and Ariana were staring at her now. "Because I'd already met this Sabrina, or rather, not me, but a good friend of mine accidentally got involved with her. I had to fight her off. And if Jack really thinks she's his girlfriend, he's out of luck. But if he's her accomplice, I think you need to be careful, Julia. There's a reason he's hitting on you in front of his girlfriend." "Who is she?" Julia and Ariana exclaimed together. "A divorcee." Jack kept looking for Julia, but he couldn't see her anywhere. Where had she gone? Another hour at the mall and Sabrina would ruin him. When he suggested she go to some restaurant at the mall, she wrinkled her nose and said that mall restaurants were only for beggars. "Wow, for beggars. That's the last time you had coffee in one of those for half my paycheck." The young man resented, but said aloud, "I just thought we could still run in to buy those shoes you liked last time." "I don't want those shoes anymore." Sabrina sensed that Jack was ready for any shopping spree. "I've got other shoes." "Of course you did." Jack smiled, thinking to himself, "I'm not marrying you. I'll lay down my bones, but I'll get Dashka's favor back." They walked through the shopping center for several hours, but Julia was never seen. The young man was in despair. His idea was failing miserably. There was almost no money left, and Sabrina showed with all her appearance that she did not intend to stop yet. The shoes were joined by a purse, a belt, and here. Sabrina looked at our house from the door, like a bargainer evaluating what she could get for what. Evan, in love, didn't get it, but my father and I thought there was something wrong with Katerina. The dinner was very nice. The girl behaved more than well-mannered and would have made the most favorable impression, if not for that evaluating look at the very beginning of acquaintance. Vanya went to see her off, and my father and I looked at each other. "Did it seem to you too that she was not who she said she was?" My father asked me. I confirmed his fears. The next day, my father instructed his head of security. A week later, we knew everything. This Sabrina, along with her accomplices, a man, a woman, and 2 other girls, were rounding up rich or aspiring to be so men. The man and woman posed as the girls' rich parents, the girls, respectively, their only spoiled daughter. They rented expensive apartments or houses, brought their potential suitors for acquaintance, and then the girls promoted these very grooms for expensive things, which were then sold and swapped for cheaper copies. When the grooms began to suspect something or landed on the ground, the company quickly folded and changed the scene. Vanya, of course, didn't believe us at first, but our head of security secretly brought him to the house of this one, and they watched together. Besides Vanya, she was rounding up a couple more. Of course, my brother suffered a lot, but he's better now. He doesn't want to date girls yet, though. Kyra smiled and looked at her dumbfounded friends. Sipping her coffee, she turned to Julia. "And now we need to think. What does this? What's his name?" "Your security guard. I do not think that he has so much money to court this girl." "Which means, maybe he's an accomplice. What do you think, Dash?" "Well, John gave him money for me too, and he's paid a good salary. But yes, if this Sabrina has such demands, then you won't be able to afford her anytime soon. If he hasn't already." Ariana suggested, "It's not for nothing that he's making eyes at you in front of her. Maybe they've decided to expand and take a son into the family." "But I know who he is." Julia tried to justify Jack. It seemed unreal to her that he was capable of such a scam. "You do, but the rest of us don't. Be careful." "Julia, we're here." Julia was awakened from her musings by the loud voice of the driver. The car door on her side was open, with a smiling John standing beside her. "Tired? Come on, I'll make you some tea," he pronounced, holding out his hand and helping the girl out of the car. "I must tell John everything," flashed through Julia's mind. John was staring nervously out the window in his office. It was snowing outside the window. Big soft snowflakes fell lazily to the ground as if to suggest that it was time to forget about work and think about the approaching new year. But work was the last thing on John's mind right now. He had already noticed the glances one of his guards cast at his wife. The glances were full of pleading and hope. Julia was also glancing at the guy, but her gaze was worriedly pensive. John was about to fire this guard, but suddenly 2 of his men ended up in the hospital after one of the fights. He didn't want to lose any more employees. He had to do something about it. Sometimes he felt like Julia had been preoccupied lately, that she wanted to tell him something. John was afraid of that and avoided talking to her. What if she told him to leave him? He couldn't bear it. She's too important to him now. He'd kill him. And her, what he could do to her, John had no idea. Lock her in the house and never let her out? Or, on the contrary, kick her out in disgrace? "Step, we need to talk." Julia came into the office. "Sorry, I'm busy. Let's do it later." "But you're just standing at the window." "Julia, I'm working. What position I'm in is none of your business." John turned away from the window to look at his wife and immediately regretted that he had snapped. She looked at him with tear-filled eyes for a minute and then turned around to run out of the office. "Julia, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to." He caught up with her in the hallway. "It's all right, John. Work," whispered his wife, barely holding back tears. Julia flew into the bedroom, quickly dressed, and jumped outside. The cool air would soothe her. Why did she think her spouse would help her? He'd been so distant lately. That's it, he'd had his fun, thought the girl, walking slowly down the snow-covered path in the garden. Well, what did you want? That he would love you in time, like you did him. Julia finally admitted to herself what she had been afraid to even think about. She was in love with her husband. Respect and trust had grown into true love. John seemed to feel the same way about her, but lately, he'd suddenly pulled away. Again began to be late at work, little talk with her, and in general, it seemed, tried not to meet with her. The only thing that kept them together was the bed. There John became the same gentle, affectionate, passionate, and in love. Unlike her husband Jack, on the contrary, became more active. He began to catch her more and more often in the garden or in the house, talking about his feelings and how he regretted trading her for money. "Jack, what happened is what happened," Julia answered him, "and perhaps it was all for the best. My husband and I are on good terms, and you've got a girl. A beautiful, well-to-do girl." "Julia, why do you lie to me and to yourself?" Jack exclaimed. "How can you have a wonderful relationship with a man who bought you? He'll use you, enjoy his ego, and then leave you." "I've talked about this." Julia felt hurt that her mended relationship with John was being called into question by a man who basically wasn't supposed to give a damn about her life at all. "If it happens, it's not my fault. I try to be a good wife." Even in bed, Jack was infuriated at her stubbornness. He hadn't expected such resistance from the always soft and docile Julia. "That's none of your business." Julia turned to leave, but Jack caught her again. "I'm sorry. It's just jealousy. I just can't imagine you with another man." "Well, don't imagine it. Get on with your relationship with Sabrina, or you'll blow it like you blew ours." "I don't give a damn about my relationship. I'm with Sabrina to get my mind off you." "Just for that?" Julia looked at her ex-fiancé closely. "What do you mean?" he stammered. These conversations were happening more and more often between them. Not a day went by that Jack didn't catch her in some secluded corner. Julia was beginning to fear him. She wanted to talk to John about it, but he was avoiding her. Once she'd even tried to start a conversation in bed, but he just covered her mouth with his kiss. Julia felt dizzy with excitement. Finding the nearest bench, she struggled to reach it and sank down onto the snow-covered seat. Nausea rose to her throat. The girl inhaled deeply of the cold air and the nausea receded. She had been feeling sick a lot lately. Perhaps it was the effects of excitement and worry. Jack's siege, John's indifference, all of it had frayed her nerves. After sitting on the bench for a few minutes, Julia got up and slowly went into the house. She should drink some hot tea and lie down with a book. She did not see that two pairs of eyes had been watching her all this time. "John." Selima entered the man's office without knocking. "What's going on?" "What do you mean?" John feigned surprise, though he guessed why the old woman had flown in. "What's going on with you and Julia? Did you two have a fight?" "Why would you say that?" "You're always frowning. She's not herself." "What happened?" "Selina, why don't we handle this?" John's on the offensive. "You can do it yourself, but the girl is alone in a strange house. Don't forget how she got here, and you promised to take care of her and not to let her get hurt. And now you're hurting her." "How?" "With your indifference and your disgruntled look. She, poor thing, has no one to complain to. She walks around like a shadow. What did you do to her?" "Really nothing." "Nothing? You should have, or is that it? You've had enough? Tired of the toy?" "What are you talking about, Selina? What kind of toy is she?" "She's my wife." "Then take care of your wife. The poor girl's about to kill herself." "What are you talking about?" John roared. "You're talking out of your ass. What makes you think that?" "I've been explaining it to you for an hour. The girl's not herself, like a shadow. Pale, wobbly." John frowned. Yes, indeed, he had seen Julia stagger through the window into the garden and almost fall on the bench. Without a word, he rushed out of the study. Julia made her way to the bedroom with difficulty. There was no strength left for tea. "That's it. I've got to send everyone to hell and take care of myself. I'm not going to let them play with me like a doll anymore. If John doesn't want to be a normal family with me, I don't care either. He doesn't want to hang out with me for God's sake. I'll take care of my own problems. And with Jack too. I'll just ignore him. And if he persists, I'll complain to the head of security. After all, I'm the boss of this place. It's his duty to keep me away from his subordinates. Barely touching her pillow, Julia drifted into sleep. John looked anxiously at his sleeping wife. Indeed, Julia looked pale and thin. Something had happened to her, and he, instead of helping her, had withdrawn from her. What an idiot he is. It was all those looks between Julia and Jack, but it could be something else entirely. Not what he thought it was. Even if it was, he has a right as a husband to know what's going on, especially since Julia herself tried to talk to him several times, and he chickened out, scared for himself, for his feelings, that he'd lose her only after realizing how much he loves her. Julia had been asleep for hours. Selena came quietly into the bedroom. "John, it's not normal. She's been asleep too long. Call him." Jacob was the family doctor. John had once helped him get rid of annoying guardians for his clinic. Jacob had been coming to John's house ever since, which he did immediately this time. "She seems to be in a deep faint," the doctor said thoughtfully. "Has she been complaining about anything lately?" "No, I don't know." John looked at Selena questioningly. "You and your husband?" Shook her head and turned to the doctor. "She's been sad lately. She hasn't been eating well. I even saw her stagger a couple times." "And you haven't asked her anything all this time?" Jacob looked at John and the old woman from under his glasses in surprise. "So I asked her once." Selena started to justify herself. "And she said it was all right." Jacob shook his head and fumbled in his briefcase. A minute later, a vial appeared, and when he opened it, the bedroom filled with the smell of ammonia. Julia grimaced and opened her eyes abruptly. An elderly man with large glasses was leaning over her. "Why are you frightening the household, Julia?" he said reproachfully. "Eh? What's wrong?" Julia looked from the man to John to Selena. "You tell us what happened." "Nothing happened. I was walking in the garden. I felt sick and decided to lie down. I must have fallen asleep." Julia gradually came to her senses after the dream and the sudden awakening. John's face was so frightened and worried that it warmed her heart. He was worried about her. Jacob turned to John and Selena. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave the room. I have something to discuss with my patient." "But," John started to protest, but the doctor interrupted him. "This is strictly confidential. If Julia sees fit, she will inform you about her health." Seeing with what indignation John was leaving the bedroom, Julia could hardly hide her smile. She was pleased that her husband cared so much about her health, and therefore about her. "Well, my dear, now tell me, when was the last time you had female ailments?" The doctor interrupted her musings. "Pardon me?" Julia stared at him incomprehensibly. "It's just that it's the very first cause of your condition. And judging by the deep fainting spell we just brought you out of, you're not looking after your health at all." But Julia didn't know what to say. She had forgotten that women have their own peculiarities. "I have to take some tests, but first I need this information, so I know which test I should take." Half an hour later, Jacob, smiling, said, "Well, Julia, I can congratulate you with almost certainty. Do you want to tell me yourself or yourself?" Julia dazedly digested the information. "Then I strongly advise you to take good care of your health. Don't worry, eat well, and walk a lot. Have a good day." The doctor packed his briefcase and headed for the door. "I'll call you tomorrow to let you know the results and to make arrangements for you to see the specialist you need." Instead of saying goodbye, he left the room. "Jacob, what's wrong?" Selena rushed over to him. "It's all right, but I took some tests from your wife," Jacob said to John. The man nodded and, without a word, rushed into the bedroom. Selena stared at the doctor as he followed. "Jacob?" "It's all right, Selena," the man said, winking at the old woman and walking out. "You scared us." John looked at his wife worriedly. "Will you talk to me now?" Julia was determined. "Or should I scare you again?" "Maybe not today. You're too weak. I assure you, I am strong enough to talk." "All right, we'll talk." "We will. But not tonight." John had to get his act together and prepare for this conversation. "When?" Tomorrow. You'll leave early for work and stay late. And then you'll reschedule the conversation for the next day. And so on and so forth." "No, I won't go to work tomorrow. I promise." Julia looked carefully into her husband's eyes. There was an anxiety in them that he was trying hard to hide. "What's wrong, John?" Julia asked her husband quietly. Perhaps the conversation she had urged him to have was unnecessary. He didn't care about her, and therefore he didn't care about her concerns about Jack. "Are you, tired of married life?" "Me? Oh, come on." John hugged his wife. "No, of course not. It's just, I've had a lot on my mind." "Step, I'm begging you, please. Don't keep anything from me. I mean, your attitude towards me. It's hard for me to live in uncertainty. Lately, you've become different. I thought things were working out, but all of a sudden, you've become distant from me. I don't know what to think." Julia's tears came to her eyes. "Does it really matter to you?" John gently lifted her face and looked into her eyes. "Does our relationship matter?" "Of course it is." "Julia." John began to kiss her face. "We'll make it work. I promise you. I think you have a chance to find out whether he's another victim or an accomplice." Julia and John strolled slowly through the garden. Since the morning, Julia had been looking forward to this conversation. As luck would have it, Stipa's phone rang at the beginning of breakfast, and without eating, he went into the study, where he talked for almost 2 hours. When he came out of there and saw the questioning look of his wife, he nodded, letting her know that he remembered everything, and now this long-awaited conversation would take place. "Now I'll have a cup of coffee, and it's all yours." But even after coffee, the conversation was postponed. Another important call. "What have they got there without me?" Apocalypse began. John exclaimed unhappily and went into the office again. Julia looked in half an hour later. Her husband was still on the phone. Sighing, she closed the door. It looked like there would be no chance to talk today or anytime soon. However, she was wrong. Her husband noticed her in her frustration and immediately growled into the receiver. "What am I paying you money for? You can't solve a basic problem." There were objections in the phone, but John wouldn't listen. "Either you solve it or you're fired tomorrow." Throwing the phone on the table, John left the office. He found his spouse in the bedroom. She was standing at the window watching the flakes of snow fall outside the window. "Beautiful weather." John put his arm around her shoulders. "Let's go for a walk in the garden. We can talk. It certainly won't be difficult for me to know the answer to your question. But what's in it for you? Why do you care so much about Jack's fate?" John stopped and looked at Julia carefully. He wanted not only to hear, but to read the truth on her face. Julie's gaze was calm. A slight smile touched her lips. "Are you jealous?" The question was as direct and natural as if she were asking about the weather. "Yes," John answered simply as well, continuing to gaze into her face. The woman's eyes brightened and her cheeks flushed. "I don't care about Jack's fate, that he makes his choices. It's just, he's been more insistent on me lately." "What do you mean?" John's eyes have turned into angry little slits. "Well, he catches me all the time. In the house, on walks, talking about how he loves me and wants to be with me. Even though he's still seeing Sabrina. Step, I don't know what it is yet, but I'm scared. Why didn't you tell me this before?" "I tried, but you kept running away from the conversation." John looked away. Really, Julia had been trying to talk to him for days now, and he's been acting like a little maiden of honor. What's the matter with him? He's always thought of himself as a sensible man, capable of judging a situation soberly. But with his wife, he suddenly lost all logic and common sense. "I'm sorry. From now on, I will be more attentive to you." John put his arm around his wife's shoulders and they continued their walk. Jack suddenly came flying out of the next corner. Julia, when he saw John, he stopped abruptly, not knowing what to do. Julia never went out into the garden with her husband. Not finding her in the house, he thought the girl was out for a walk and ran to catch her. John and Julia stopped too, and an awkward silence hung. "First of all, hello," John said calmly, looking at Jack from head to toe. "Secondly, why do you call my wife Julia and not Julia?" "But, John, Julia and I were friends. We were friends. Need I remind you how?" "No. Go to work." Jack quickly turned and ran back to the house. John leaned over and kissed his wife tenderly. Julia sat in the living room, digesting Jacob's news. As promised, he had called the next day to tell her that his assumptions were correct. At first, she wanted to tell her husband, but then she changed her mind. She wanted to get used to the idea of motherhood, and just like that, just to tell the news did not want to. It was necessary to prepare everything. For 2 days, Julia thought of a method of breaking the news to John. She suddenly remembered his strange look when she had conditioned him that she wanted to get pregnant as soon as possible. Maybe he didn't want children. Well, if that was really the case, he would have to accept it. I have news for you. John sat down next to his spouse and hugged her. This Jack really doesn't know who his Sabrina is. He thinks she's a girl from a very rich family, and he's been spending all his money on her, trying to fulfill her needs. Well then, why is he following me? Well, I have 2 options here. Either he wants to take advantage of you for grooming his girlfriend, or he wants to assuage his wounded ego. Julia looked at her husband in surprise. John, what are you talking about? A lark? From me? To assuage a wounded ego? My dear, I don't see anything you should be so surprised about. You're married to a man of unlimited means. How many cases are there where ladies in love don't hesitate to spend their husband's capital on their lovers? Or Bano. His bride was stolen from under his nose, and in such a way that in the eyes of normal people he looks like a scumbag. So he wants to get you back, to prove, first of all, to himself that he pulled off a good deal. How awful. Julia couldn't believe her ears. In any case, my love, he's not going to succeed in any of his schemes. I won't let him hurt you. Thank you, John. Julia snuggled up to her husband, then jumped up like a stunned man. Wait, what did you say? Did I just hear you? Or did you just say that? What? That I'm your love. John stared into his wife's widened eyes in surprise and couldn't say a word. The words were stuck in his throat. Step, don't be silent. You have no idea how important this is to me. Julia stared into her husband's face, but found no answer. Realizing that he said it just in passing, the woman quickly got up from the couch and rushed into the bedroom. Falling on the bed, she sobbed. Why had she questioned him back? She would have been in happy ignorance, and now she knew for certain that he does not have for her the feelings that filled her. Julia, her husband's heavy hand stroked her back. Julia, I didn't misspoke. I do love you. I just don't know what's happening to me. I feel like the stupid boy. I've never felt anything like this before. I don't know what I'm supposed to do with all of this. John. Julia threw herself on his neck. You don't have to think about anything. Just love. Oh, my darling. If you knew how I've longed for you to say that to me, dreamed it and was afraid it wouldn't happen. Julia, John took her face in his hands. Julia, am I to understand that our feelings are mutual? Of course they are. My darling, my only darling. I love you more than anything in the world. He didn't let her continue, covering her mouth with his lips. Everything around them ceased to exist. They lay cuddled together and talked, remembering their childhood, sharing their feelings and worries about their love not being reciprocated. What 2 fools we are, laughed John. We should have just talked. Women are always more hesitant about these things. But me, a grown man, and yet I was blinking like a little girl. I thought if you let me know my feelings weren't mutual, I'd die. Julia leaned into her husband's shoulder. John kissed her on the top of her head and only then noticed that in the bedroom there was a small table set for a romantic dinner. Julia, what's this? He pointed to the table. Oh, with all this worry, I'd forgotten. I wanted to give you a romantic dinner. Yes? John leaned over to his wife and kissing her asked, what's the occasion? We're having a baby. John looked like he'd been electrocuted. The news had hit him like an icy shower. He pulled away from Julia and stared at her incredulously. How's the baby? John, what are you doing? Julia was frightened. Was her assumption that he didn't want children about to be confirmed? You don't want to? John got out of bed, walked over to the table, took the bottle of wine and sipped from the neck, then turned to the frightened Julia. Her pale visage and quivering lips brought him to his senses. He took another sip and sat down next to her. Step. The woman reached out to touch his cheek, but never dared to do so, frozen with her hand raised. Without looking, he caught her hand and pressed his lips to it. A tear rolled down his cheek. Julia, you have no idea what this news means to me. I didn't think I'd ever see it again. To be honest, I tried not to think about it at all. Why? I'll tell you about it later. John put the bottle on the floor and leaned over to his wife's belly. Hey baby, how are you doing in there? You tell me what's going on, your daddy. I will solve everything." Julia stroked her husband's head. She felt very weak from relief, lay down and almost immediately fell asleep to John's murmuring to her belly. Jack watched the flower van pull into the yard. After meeting Julia and John in the garden, he had been transferred to the gate and was no longer authorized to enter the house. "Is there a party going on?" he asked his partner. "Don't you know about it?" "No, I'm coming from a day off. I was at my parents'. I don't know what your latest news is." So Julia made John happy with the news that she was pregnant. He's going crazy with happiness. "They say we're going to get a bonus for it." "A bonus is a good thing," Jack said. His plans were falling apart right before his eyes. "Oh, for God's sake." Selena came out of the house. "People are ordering Christmas trees, and this guy is buying flowers. What's with all this? What if Julia gets allergic?" "Selena, why are you crying before your time? If she gets allergies, we'll throw out the flowers and put up Christmas trees." John, in a t-shirt and shorts, rushed to help move the flowers into the house. When Julia woke up, she didn't immediately realize where she was. There were flowers all around. It was as if she had fallen asleep in a greenhouse. She threw on a robe and ran out of the bedroom. There was a bustle of activity downstairs and flowers all around. John, as if sensing her gaze, looked up. "Good morning, my love." In 2 seconds, he flew up the stairs and kissed his wife. "Good morning, my love." Julia was so happy that she was beginning to dread this happiness. She pressed herself against her husband and, pointing downward with her eyes, asked, "What does all this mean?" "It means that my beloved spouse wants to make me a father." John kissed her again. Jack was thrashing from corner to corner in his room in the guardhouse. To satisfy Sabrina's demands, he had gotten into debt and even took out a few loans. He kept hoping that Julia would remember his former feelings and throw herself into his arms, but the girl paid no attention to his attempts to get closer. Moreover, he was now unable to approach her at all, much less speak to her. And then there was the news of her pregnancy. How could she? She had to leave her husband's money dreams behind and get to work on Sabrina. But that required money. Banks refused him credit, and his workmates asked him to pay back old debts first. In desperation, he tried to explain everything to Sabrina, but she only snorted contemptuously. "Don't you mean to say, my dear, that now my parents have to support you?" "Wouldn't that be nice?" thought Jack, but after a couple of meetings with an indigent Jack, Sabrina disconnected her phone. After a few days of unsuccessful attempts to call, the guy decided to drive down to her place and beg her to help him at least with his loans. To his surprise, at the door of Sabrina's apartment, he ran into another man. That one was also looking for his fiancée who lived in the apartment. They spent a long time ringing and knocking on doors. They got to know each other and found out that they had similar situations. Even the girl was the same, except she introduced herself as Victoria. "You fools have been scammed." An old woman with brightly painted lips and a cigarette in a long mouthpiece leaned out of the next door. "They're scammers. They scam suckers like you. How many of you have been here?" He. The granny's laugh was the worst. Everyone thought they were the only ones allowed into this palace, but in reality, he. I've been watching them for a long time, and I wondered how they could be so stupid and not see these cheats. "Do you know where they might have moved?" Jack asked cautiously, but the answer was the sound of a door closing and an obnoxious giggle. On stiff legs, he returned to the guardhouse. He didn't know what to do next. The thought of asking Walker for it flashed through his mind, but he immediately banished it. What if? Jack brushed the thought away like a fly, but immediately brought it back. "Julia. We must find a way to meet Julia and ask her for the money. She's kind. She won't say no." Julia got into the car, and it started right away. It was a couple of days before the new year, and the woman decided to go shopping after the clinic to buy presents for everyone. She didn't immediately notice that the car was going in the wrong direction. "Excuse me, did you find a shorter way to the clinic? Why aren't we taking the usual route?" She turned to the driver. Jack's face looked back at her from the rear-view mirror. The only way to intercept Julia was in the car, but Jack was not allowed in the driver's seat as her chauffeur. There was no other way out. It was necessary to act by stealth. Soon such an opportunity presented itself. Jack saw the hostess's car being prepared. Gently inquiring for whom, the man found out that Julia was going to the city. Not thinking long, Jack tricked the driver into one of the back rooms, and after hitting him hard on the back of the head, which knocked him unconscious, locked him in there. Luck was on Jack's side. No one noticed as he got into his car and drove out of the yard with Julia. Julia, busy with her own thoughts, didn't notice anything at first either. Instead of the city direction, Jack drove in the opposite direction. "What do you want?" Julia's gaze fixed coldly on the rearview mirror. Wow, they've only been living a week, and already they've got the same look in their eyes as the hubby. Jack thought angrily, "I want you to help me. I hope you thought carefully before you did such a thing, and that you have a very good reason for it. I need the money." Julia grinned. Jack was beginning to get angry. Did she really think her husband was so all-powerful? It wouldn't be long before she'd be missed. In that time, he would do whatever he wanted to her. But first, Jack wanted to settle things amicably. "Julia, I really need money. I've got a lot of debts, and I've got to ask you for it. So you sold me for a substantial amount of money, and now you're asking me to pay for your *****. Wow, talking to Walker is not good for you." Julia didn't react to that. "I'm not asking you to pay for my expenses. I'm asking your husband, through you. So you thought that by kidnapping me, you could ask John for ransom? No, you either make nice and we drive back, or you explain to everyone without complaint that your driver was slow and you were in a hurry. Or either." Julia raised an eyebrow. "Either it's going to be bad." "How's that, I wonder? I'm the one who's going to make out with you on camera, and if you don't give me money, I'll show it to your husband. Or I'll put it online with the caption, 'Walker's wife role-playing. You a shoal.'" "Julia, there's no way out." "There's always a way out." "Well, so I gave you two options." Julia looked out of the window. They were driving in the open countryside. She didn't want to run in the cold snow, and she didn't want to run through it, as if realizing her intentions. Jack stopped and got out of the car. Then he got back into the car next to Julia. "I know you won't run anywhere. You're afraid for the baby. So go ahead and say yes." "I will. I'll talk to Stepa. They'll give you some money." "No, I don't want that. He'll lend it to me and I'm not going to pay him back. You'll do it quietly. You'll say you spent it on some trinket." "Okay, I'll do it." Jack smirked and was about to get out of the car when a thought crept into his head. Julia's going to cheat on him. As soon as he gets her home, she'll tell her hubby, and then he'll be in trouble. "No, my dear." Jack grinned and turned to Julia. "I need some insurance." He began ripping off her clothes. Julia struggled desperately and thought of the baby with horror. Almost fainting with hopelessness, she suddenly felt free. A minute more, and she was in such a warm and loving embrace. John. Forgetfulness had taken her in its saving embrace. John. Julia had gone to the clinic with Jack. With Evan, John had served together. After a tour of duty and a contract, they both came home. John wanted to go into business. Evan was discharged for being wounded. And while John had a grip of steel, Evan was slowly starting to drink himself to death. John found him in a bad way, got him out, fixed him up, gave him a job. Eventually, Evan took over as John's chief of security. He was back on the job and back to doing what he loved. Every hour, Evan reviewed the video from the surveillance cameras distributed throughout the area around the house. What was his indignation when he saw the wrong driver getting into the landlady's car? Moreover, he himself had personally forbidden this Jack to approach Julia Igorevna after Walker had spoken out to him about the behavior of his subordinates. Evan, why can't my wife move around in her own home? What kind of familiarity is it to have your subordinates talk to her? Evan apologized and immediately punished the insolent guard, promising him subsequent dismissal. He could not warn John about his wife leaving with the wrong driver. Fortunately, all of Walker's cars were equipped with satellite tracking systems that Jack didn't know about. Dialing the owner's number with one hand, Evan used the other to request the car's location. A minute later, the security car, led by Evan, was in pursuit. John was already rushing to his wife's aid, disregarding traffic laws and patrol signals. He overtook the car with Julia in it as well as the security car. John was mad with anger, and only the half-fainting state of his wife prevented him from committing the irreparable. Having thrown Jack out, he rushed to his wife and, picking her up in his arms, carried her to his car. Fortunately, everything went well in the health of Julia, and the baby was not affected by the incident. The very next day, her well-being to the joy of John and Zoe Selena became the same. Her husband did not leave her a step away from her. They prepared a festive dinner together and celebrated the new year in a quiet family circle. Jack was awaiting trial in a detention center. Julia could barely convince her husband not to deal with him on his own. "John, he has family. They're gonna miss him. They're gonna start looking for him. And if, God forbid, it gets out, they'll put you in jail. Who will I stay with? Who will we stay with?" She put her hand to her stomach. "All right." John cast an angry glance at the shrinking Jack and nodded to Evan. "Take care of it." Julia wrote a statement to which the injured guard added his own statement. Jack was looking at real time. Julia leaned on her husband's shoulder. There was silence in the semi-darkness of the living room, broken only by the crackling of logs in the fireplace. Selena had long gone to bed, and the couple, having moved from the festive table to the big cozy sofa by the fireplace, did not want to leave it. "I never had time to buy you presents," Julia said quietly. "Sweetheart, the best gift Selena and I have gotten is you, and the baby you're going to give us." John kissed his wife lightly on the top of her head.
Thank you for watching this video to the end. Subscribe to the channel. Like it, write comments if you like the story, and see you on the channel.